What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to talk about Shuhei Yoshida and seemingly some weird behind-the-scenes stuff that was happening with PlayStation. Now, this is not the first time that we heard about this, but it's interesting because now Shuhei kind of said the quiet part out loud, right? We very much kind of knew, at least, right, that he was forced into doing PlayStation Indies. Now, I want to just take a second to say what an incredible talent Shuhei Yoshida is, has been a legend, has been there since the beginning, did a very good job, at least in my opinion, doing the first-party stuff. And so it's not a knock on like his role and like what he's actually done, right? It's not to I guess push aside indies and say, oh, screw indies, we don't need them. No, actually that's not true. And in the interview, he goes on to kind of praise, or I guess almost like say, hey, look, upon reflection, I did a really good job, and the indie department in PlayStation has greatly improved since I did it, and I'm happy about that. So it's not about saying he did bad in his new and final role in PlayStation, right? It's not to say it wasn't needed. It ironically, I guess, kind of worked out. It's the part that he said in this last interview. So he said that there was no choice. It was take the indie job or leave the company. Now, it doesn't sound like he's going after Jim Ryan when he says that, but he directly throws Jim Ryan under the bus, I think 2 different times in the article when I was offered the role. And then he kind of doubled back later on in the interview, and he said that line. He said that there was no choice. It wasn't, hey, are you looking to move around? Like, do you want to try indie? Do you want to help us out in that department? Because PlayStation was weaker, in the indie department before Shuhei took that role. Do you want to maybe try that? Do you want to stay at first party? What do you want to do? No. He intentionally went back to the part where he talked about Jim Ryan and his communication with him about indies to then literally say that it was that or get the F out. And that is my biggest problem. And I'm sorry, I truly am. But that is the most disappointing thing I think I've ever seen. I'm not here to say, oh, these people are the most evil people on the planet. We all have lives. We play video games, right? It's like, at the end of the day, these people make these decisions, and largely there's nothing we can do about any of them, right? We're kind of just observers, all that jazz, things that we've talked about in the past. But how do you do this? How do you literally do this to somebody who, again, he's been around since the PS1, and all of these interviews, not just with VentureBeat that, he said this on, but all of these different sites, all these different outlets, he did the Greg Miller thing. I mean, one of the greatest things you can kind of hear when Shuhei talks is just that history, right? Like, there's not that many people that have his, like, portfolio, right? Like, Mark Cerny actually is another one, and he's getting older, and his time, I imagine, would almost be up. In fact, his time probably would have already been up with Jim Ryan back in the day if he wasn't freaking designing these PlayStation consoles. He would have been kicked to the curb. But, I don't understand. I really don't, because people like this. I mean, I guess I should. To be honest with you, I guess I should, because Shawn Layden, how we, in retrospect, looking back at like how he left, it was actually pretty clear he was also kicked the F out, right? And that was highly disappointing, because I don't know every intricacy of, what that guy did for PlayStation, but I know his role in like bringing back Crash Bandicoot. Like, he was a primary person that did that. He was big, and he was big into single player, story-driven games. He talks a lot now about games that need to go back to like 15, 20 hours. Well, he always kind of was like that, so I've always really respected and liked Shawn Layden in that tenure, when he had that role. But he was seemingly kicked out, and nobody really wanted to talk about it. It's actually funny, to be honest with you. Look, I mean, like, PlayStation has given me codes, and yet I'm not afraid to speak up, when I feel like it. It's odd who feels the urge to talk about this stuff versus who doesn't, right? Because nobody really touched the Shawn Layden thing. If you guys notice, nobody really touched that. You look at the kind of funnies, the people that interview Shuhei Yoshida and love the guy, Greg and Shuhei go all the way back. Are they talking about, maybe they are. I don't watch them daily, but are they talking about this stuff right here? Because I feel like people don't want to go after like old management at PlayStation, and you could probably understand why. From like legacy media, they don't want their rights removed, from PlayStation. I don't really see what the big deal is, because Jim Ryan is no longer there. I think it's good to learn from the past. It's not just punching down or punching up just to do it and say, oh, I'm going to make 50 videos, or I'm going to talk for 5 hours about how bad of a person this was. It's about learning. I think it's about learning something from past past mistakes so you never make those mistakes again. And you look at that Jim Ryan era, and you can easily look at the live service, right? That's something that everybody talks about daily. I will say that is a thing that nobody is afraid to touch, okay? Everybody is very willing to say, okay, what is one of the main issues that came from the Jim Ryan era? It was these live service stuff. He greenlights 12 of them. 9 of them get shut down. A complete and utter failure, right? But what about this? What about literally how you treat your staff? No, I'm not saying it was 1,000% Jim Ryan. Now, actually, Shuhei specifically says it was Jim Ryan, but hey, maybe Jim got his orders from somebody higher up, even higher than him. That's definitely possible. But also, I mean, if that's true, that's even worse. I would argue that's even worse, because how do you do that to a guy that, and I'm not saying, by the way, keep people around just because they've been around forever. That's probably not a wise way to run any company, okay? You have 30 years of employment. That doesn't mean they're 30 good years, okay? However, when you look at Shuhei and what he was able to do back in the late 90s, all through the 2000s, surviving from the PS2 to the PS3, watching over the Vita, all the stuff that this guy has done, he has been very good. Like, he is actually a very good talent. It's not just that he's been there for a while. It's that, well, he's been there for a while because he's been good for a while, right? And I just don't understand. So that's just, to me, it's just the most disrespectful thing I think I've seen in a long time. Now, I like the guy. I listened to him talk to Greg and Colin and stuff on Podcast Beyond 15 years ago, okay? I grew up, getting into IGN, getting into those podcasts, and Shuhei would jump on every year or so and talk to them, and he just always seemed like a cool guy, but a guy very tuned in, a guy that really seems to understand, like, games, the thing that he works on. He really seems to get it, and so maybe there's like a biasness, but how do you tell a guy, truly, a guy who's been with you back at 2018, 2017, whenever this happened, he's been with you for so long, and then you come in and then you tell him, okay, I'm taking over. Do you want to try indies? Actually, let me rephrase that. You're going to try indies, or you're going to get the hell out of this office because I'm kicking you out. How do you do that to somebody like that? Again, ironically, it worked out. Ironically, he helped PlayStation indies. It actually turned into something, and PlayStation is actually better off because he did that. So funny enough, this all worked out. But I feel like maybe that's part of why people won't talk about it, because it's like, well, at the end of the day, Alex, I guess it actually worked. Yeah, but how would you feel? Well, what if it actually happened to you? Or shouldn't we still talk about the idea that PlayStation forced a guy in his role for how long he's been with the company? Shouldn't we talk about how they forced him into something, or they said, get out? Isn't that a problem? We should. And look, Jim Ryan's not there anymore, but is anybody there from that decision process? Because if anybody's still there that had anything to do with that, I'm not saying get rid of them, but you need to have a hard talk and say, okay, have you changed as a person? Have we changed as a company in any way? Are we not going to do that anymore? Is what's stopping them from doing it to somebody else? And there's been a couple of these. Like I said, how they treated Sean Layden on the way out is kind of alarming. Now we know Shuhei, for sure. And then remember Connie Booth? Remember that just a few years ago? David Jaffe talked about that. That's kind of it. Nobody really touched that, I feel like, either. That was kind of a big deal, kicking her to the curb and what all she had done for PlayStation up until that time. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.